You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This recording is our 2026 Easter meditation entitled A Radiant Theosis, Catching a Flash of the True Self on Resurrection Sunday. Thanks for tuning in. As this Resurrection Sunday approaches, I've been struck again by the mystery of the story captured in Matthew 28. But this year in particular, it's happened in a way I haven't felt in quite some time. As usual, the Easter story begins with a quiet wink back to Genesis by saying, on the first day of the week, letting us know that something new is about to be birthed. But then Matthew adds something subtle. He tells us that this story takes place just as it begins to dawn. And the Greek there is epiphosko, epi meaning at the onset, and phos meaning light. So this story begins not just in time, but in illumination, at the onset of light, at the edge of an awakening. And then, as if to make the point unmistakable, a messenger appears, an angel, which simply means one who carries a word from God. And this messenger arrives like lightning. There's a flash, a sudden brightness, an interruption of the ordinary. And the text tells us that at the sight of this illumination, the guards fall down in fear, phobeo in the Greek, where we get our word phobia from. They collapse, they freeze, they become, as the story says, like dead men. But then the messenger turns, not to the guards, but to the women, maybe because the women always seem to get it first. And he says, do not be afraid. Do not phobeo at this phosko. You got to love a little Greek wordplay, right? Essentially, the encouragement of this messenger is, do not fear this inbreaking illumination. It's really striking, isn't it? Because the same light that terrifies some awakens others, right? And so the women are told, he is not here, he has been raised. And they leave the tomb holding both their fear and their great joy, running to tell the others. And that's how the story goes. Now, as we've said many times in our community, there are lots of ways to read these ancient stories. And this year, I want to read this one as a moment of illumination through a mystical lens. Because over these past weeks in Lent, we've been circling around a simple but revelatory truth, that the traditional practice of giving up is not about deprivation, but it's about being intentional about waking up. That when we begin to loosen our grip on our identities, the patterns and protective strategies that no longer serve us, we don't just lose ourselves, but rather we begin to see more clearly. We begin to wake up to a deeper presence, a wider belonging, and a more spacious way of being. Or, as we've said throughout this series, we begin to wake up from the false self into the true self. And just earlier yesterday, on Good Friday, I released a meditation reflecting on how, contemplatively speaking, one way to see Good Friday is the letting go of and ultimately the death of the false self. The death of all of our striving to earn what has always been ours. Because so much of our lives are shaped by the stories we've carried, what happened to us and what we've done wrong and what we fear might happen next. We rehearse them and we build identities around them. And before we know it, we're living not from presence, but from fear. We stop living from wholeness and begin to give in to something else, this narrative of separation. That's the false self. It's the version of us that believes that we really are alone out there or in here, that we really do have to protect ourselves at all costs, and even that we are what has happened to us. And you can feel it when you're living from that place, right? Always needing to prove yourself, always scanning for what might go wrong, pulling away when things feel vulnerable, organizing your life around control or comparison, and projecting your fears onto others. It's exhausting, isn't it? But then, when we learn to give that up, something shifts. In a sobering moment of honesty or surrender, or a moment where we stop trying so hard to hold it all together, something loosens. And in that loosening, there's often, even if just for a second, a flash, a kind of inner illumination moment like the women had at the empty tomb. A sense that maybe we are not as separate as we thought. Maybe we are not as alone as we feared. Maybe we are not defined by our pasts, and maybe, just maybe, something new is inbreaking. Maybe we are held. That's the beginning of resurrection. Because notice this with me. The text doesn't say Jesus raised himself, right? Have you ever felt like you had to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and just kind of grin and bear your way through life? No, the story says he has been raised, which in the first century imagination was a way of saying that his life, his way of love and nonviolence and presence was not extinguished by death. What he could do was surrender himself, but for his way of life to continue on after he was gone was another thing altogether. And maybe what we can learn is that what was most true about him could never really be taken away. And so perhaps the mystical invitation of Easter is this. What if that is also true of you and me? What if resurrection isn't just something that's storied to have happened to Jesus, but what if it is something that happens whenever we surrender the false self and are raised into the truth of who we already are? The mystics have always spoken about this. They call it a kind of death, a dying before you die. That is, a letting go of the ego, of that separate defensive self. Because the ego's primary job is to keep us safe by keeping us separate. But the true self isn't separate at all. The true self is a self at rest in union with love. And so, what if mystical resurrection is simply this? A life grounded unflinchingly in love. A life that no longer needs to prove, protect, or perform in the same way because it's touched upon something deeper, something more real, and something more whole. And maybe this is what's happening in Matthew's story, that lightning flash, that sudden illumination, is an invitation to a kind of awakening, a moment where reality is seen through renewed eyes, even differently. And what if then the question for us becomes, will we phobeo this fosco? Will we fear this light? Will we keep living from the small, fearful parts of us that try to govern our inner lives and the lives of others? Or will we begin trusting the true self? Because let's be honest, fear isn't going anywhere, is it? The women in the story still leave with fear. But the marked difference between them and the dead guys is they get up and walk on anyways, and they leave with joy. And that's important because resurrection does not always imply the elimination of fear. It is rather that great expansion of our lives where we learn to hold both fear and joy together, and to live from a deeper center that is no longer ruled by fear. Richard Rohr puts it this way. The only question we must answer is, who am I? Or better put, where do I abide? And he quotes Paul's letter to Colossians in answering, you are already hidden with Christ in God, and Christ is your very life. Not will be, is already. And every once in a while, we catch a glimpse of that, a flash, a radiant moment of what the early church would call theosis, a sense of union with the divine, not as something far away out of reach, but as something that's already true, already here, already your true essence. And so maybe that's what Easter is, not a demand to believe something unbelievable, but an invitation to notice something that's already happening. Perhaps even today, you might catch a flash of your true self, to realize, even if just for a moment, that beneath all the striving, all the fear, all the mind games and inner narratives of separation, that you are already held in love, already one with it, already shining. So, Way Collective friends, my hope for each of us this Resurrection Sunday is not that we figure it all out and finally get our lives in order, but that we instead let ourselves be and that we begin to notice. that maybe in some quiet moment or some unexpected interruption on your forthcoming Resurrection Sunday morning, as you contemplate this illuminating Easter story, maybe a light bulb will go off. And so may a softening happen if it does. May some new letting go begin. And may you catch a glimpse of your own depth, your own irrevocable belonging, your own hidden life in God. And when that happens, may you remember the women. May you not be surprised either by the brilliance that grounds you or if fear still resides in you. But especially, may you also notice the joy, the simplicity of your own aliveness, the pull toward connection with your loved ones, and may you learn slowly, gently, and especially imperfectly to live from that place. Because resurrection isn't somewhere else. It's here, it's now, it's inbreaking. It's what happens when we stop clinging to the separate self and allow ourselves to be raised into the truth that has always been true. We each are a part of the light that is always and already dawning. And so may you see that you are not separate, you are not alone, you are not what has happened to you. But may you recognize that your life is drenched with a mystery that sometimes goes by the name Christ, and that life is encircled within the great mystery, God. So this Easter, may you catch a flash of your own brilliance. May you see, even if just for a moment, that you are walking around shining like the sun. And may that love free you up from fear. And may you continue on in the quiet, courageous work of living from that light in a world that so deeply needs it. Happy Resurrection Sunday, my friends. Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, go to www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @waycollective. Peace and every good, y'all.